Taliban officials are attending a United Nations conference on the future of Afghanistan. It's the first time that they've joined such talks, activists criticizing the UN for inviting the Afghan rulers to the gathering in Qatar. Human rights and women's groups accuse the Taliban of wide-ranging abuses.
It was the Doha Accord, signed 4 years ago between the US and the Taliban, that helped the Taliban to come to power in August 2021. Central to the deal was an assurance that Afghanistan will not become a safe haven for terrorists. But according to the United Nations, multiple militant groups, including Al-Qaeda, operate out of Afghanistan. And it's Afghanistan's neighbors that are feeling the most heat. Pakistan, with which Afghanistan shares a more than 2,500-kilometer long border, says terrorist attacks targeting its soldiers and civilians have increased since the Afghan Taliban took control. Pakistan claims hundreds have been killed in these attacks. China, Russia, and others are also concerned by the threat of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan. The attack in Moscow this March killed more than 130 people. The attack was claimed by an affiliate of the so-called Islamic State based out of Afghanistan. But it's not only the threat of terrorism that has the world worried. Afghan Taliban are carrying out practices like these public executions. Women continue to face repressive laws and are banned from public life. Girls older than 11 years are still not allowed to study in schools and colleges. The UN has promised that even though it engages with the Taliban, there will be no compromises on women's rights. As the Taliban meet world officials, many are hoping that the diplomacy may open new ways for a more convincing dialogue with the Taliban.
A report by Binish Javed. Give us some more background. How did it come to this? Talks between the UN and the Taliban?
Ben, it has been quite a process. The UN started this process last year to discuss the future of Afghanistan and basically excluded the Afghan Taliban. This year in February, Afghan Taliban refused to participate because the UN had invited Afghan civil rights groups. And this time, human rights groups say basically the UN has succumbed to the pressure of the Afghan Taliban and have invited them to have a dialogue without inclusion of any human rights groups and women's rights activists.
I understand the criticism, but at least they're talking. Isn't dialogue a good thing?
This is the justification the United Nations is giving. Basically, they say that they have to engage with the Taliban, and they're hoping that they would come to that stage where they could talk to Afghan Taliban about human rights, about women's rights. But we also have to understand that these visuals that we see of the Afghan Taliban in Qatar meeting world officials is happening when Afghanistan is the worst women's rights crisis happening right now in the world. Afghan women are completely barred from public life. Girls over the age of 11 are not allowed to go to schools, so you can't have a future in you can't see a future in Afghanistan if you're a young woman in Afghanistan. Beauty salons are shut. Parks, gyms. Women have no access to basically public socializing, and also, all of this is happening, is having devastating consequences for Afghan women. There are incidents where Afghan Taliban have publicly flogged women because they were accused of immorality. Young girls are being forced into early marriages. Suicide rate among Afghan women is skyrocketing. And that's why in this context, it is something that has kind of sent shockwaves among human rights groups. I'll quickly mention statement of Tirana Hassan, Executive Director at Human Rights Watch. She has said, excluding women risks legitimizing the Taliban's misconduct and irreparably damages the United Nations' credibility. And Ben, despite the criticism from the United Nations that Afghan Taliban have repressive laws against women, and also from all of these human rights groups, Afghan Taliban are adamant that women's rights is a domestic issue and they would not succumb to any pressure. Let's have a listen to a statement by Zabiullah Mujahid, spokesperson of the de facto Afghan government, just before he left for Doha.
Women's rights are Afghanistan's issues. We are working to find a solution for these issues, to fulfill the needs and requirements in the framework of environment for women guided by Islamic Sharia.
So tell us more about the situation. How critical is it?
So if we focus on the security situation, within Afghanistan, I would say that things have improved, but the security is alarming or is a big concern for the region. Afghanistan, immediate neighbor of Pakistan, immediate neighbor of Afghanistan, blames that since Afghan Taliban took control, terrorist attacks in Pakistan have significantly increased. And the United Nations says that multiple terrorist groups, militant groups are operating out of Afghanistan. There are reports, UN reports, that say that the Afghan Taliban are working with Al-Qaeda and also Pakistani Taliban. So that is alarming the region. But then there are powerful countries like China and Russia who also are worried about their security. And they actually want to work with the Afghan Taliban because they are worried that anti-China and anti-Russia groups, extremist groups, could have a foothold in Afghanistan. And therefore, even if they don't like the Afghan Taliban and like the rest of the world, of course, no country has recognized the Afghan Taliban government, they are still willing to work with the Afghan Taliban because of security concerns. We can actually have a listen to what Russian president just recently said about Russia's relationship with Afghanistan.
It's a delicate, very important issue, but we have to build relations with the Taliban government. And in general, we have established the contacts. I know that Afghanistan is also developing them. So let's move forward. We must somehow establish relations with our neighboring country.
So Vladimir Putin teaming up with the Taliban?
Yes, and there are multiple reasons behind why this is happening. Of course, security is a big concern, but then Afghanistan is also rich in natural resources, so countries are also eyeing that. But if we look at from the Taliban point of view, it's a government, it's a cash-strapped government. They don't have money. Their assets, Afghanistan assets, are frozen by the Western countries. International humanitarian workers are hesitant in working with the Afghan Taliban because of their strict rules and regulations, and also, of course, their oppression of the women rights. But we are also talking about a country, Ben, where half of Afghans live in poverty, and the government doesn't have enough resources to provide for Afghan people, and therefore it is in the economic interest of the Afghan Taliban to closely work with countries, powers like Russia and China, and there are already many projects where Russia and China have invested in Afghanistan. So there are multiple reasons why, despite the fact that the Western world is not engaging with the Taliban, the overall situation on the ground is making many countries work with the Taliban, even if they don't like them.
Ines Javed, interesting insights. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.